the scene. He's got the voice that's mean, asking those questions that you never seen. He's got that fire, burning bright and clean. Andrew Keen making waves, break the routine on the Keen on show. He brings the heat, asking the minds, digging deep till they bleed. No sugar-coated truths, no lies to deceive. Andrew Keen, the master of the interview beat. He's got the knowledge, he's got the flair, challenging ideas with a fearless stare. With every question, he's uncovering what's there. Andrew Keen, a truth seeker, he's aware.
Hello, everybody. There was a time, it wasn't actually that long ago, where every book about technology and the digital revolution suggested that it was going to solve all the world's problems. And now it seems as if the reverse is true. We keep on doing books and conversations, particularly with academics who see technology and AI as compounding all the world's problems, digging a deeper hole. We did a show a few weeks ago with Meredith Broussard, a professor at NYU University. She's the author of More Than a Glitch, Confronting Race, Gender, and Ability Bias in Tech. Broussard seems to suggest that technology is only making and compounding discrimination and the way and our racial, gendered abilities, injustices. And then we also did a show with University of Edinburgh academic Shannon Valor about reclaiming our humanity in the age of AI. She has a new book out, The AI Mirror. So AI is a mirror to the world and reflects some of the good, but mostly the bad things. We're doing a similar show today with the co-author of an interesting new book. It's out this week in the United States, Feeding the Machine, the Hidden Human Labor Powering AI. And we're thrilled that we have one of its authors, James Muldoon. I think, James, you teach at the University of Essex, but you live in London, in Hackney. Congratulations on the new book. Is there any truth, James, to what I just said? Has the zeitgeist shifted, particularly in academia? A few years ago, all academics were optimistic about technology. Now they seem to be deeply pessimistic.
I think people have been pessimistic about what technology has to offer for quite a while now, at least since the Facebook files leak and the kind of techlash that was happening around the kind of start of the Trump era. But really what we're trying to show in this book is that AI is people, and behind the kind of seemingly automated and bright and sunny future actually lies the hidden labor of millions of workers that make AI possible.
It's quite a radical statement. I mean, to do a little bit of research for our conversation, I went to the page of OpenAI, still the leading AI company, and they talk about an always improving super assistant for every member of your team. Takes a second on the internet to find big corporations who are using AI to replace labor. So JP Morgan, for example, Chase is giving its employees an AI assistant. Using this example of AI assistants, which seems to be particularly hot at the moment, how would your argument suggest that it's actually really the hidden human labor behind this?
Well, with the case of ChatGPT, all we as consumers see is the kind of cursor prompt, the questions that we can ask ChatGPT. But what we don't see is the training of the model. And this is done through hundreds and thousands of hours of human beings actually helping the model be fine-tuned and to produce answers that are coherent and legible. And that is done again and again through this labor that is outsourced to various places in the global south. So we visited data annotation facilities in Kenya and Uganda, but it's also taking place in India, the Philippines, and these workers that are doing all of this work to make ChatGPT possible are getting paid less than $2 an hour in some circumstances.
So are you suggesting that you talk about AI as people, and it's perhaps AI, at least in your argument, is AI is exploited people. Are you suggesting that companies like OpenAI aren't really telling us the truth about what exactly their product is?
Well, that's part of it. I think that they are looking for a way to lower costs, and in some cases to export really dangerous and difficult work to outside of their main consumer markets. This is the kind of work when you're thinking about moderating toxic content on Facebook, or going through harmful messages, or even training ChatGPT to be less toxic. This is the kind of work that they don't want people to know exists. And they don't want people to be focusing on this aspect of AI. They just want them to see the consumer products. They want them to be in awe of their new ways of communicating. And so it's really out of sight, out of mind. And they're trying to get this work off to people that they think their main consumers are not going to care about, and find a way to make that work basically disappear.
Explain more, James, about this idea of AI being people. So when you enter something into OpenAI or Anthropic, you get immediate responses. Where are the people here? Explain more concretely what you mean.
Yeah, so in the case of what's called large language models and these chatbots that are really at the forefront, a lot of the media reporting on the most recent wave of AI, what we see is millions of workers that actually do a job called data annotation. And what they're doing is they're going through and they're training these models. They're often ranking them, seeing if they're giving good responses, sometimes writing answers for them, providing all that kind of useful data that AI needs in order to have these models developed. And so when we think, to give you another example of like an automated vehicle, 1 hour of annotated footage that this vehicle needs to get trained actually takes 800 human hours to kind of label every photo, label every video. Whatever the case with AI, it requires hundreds and thousands of hours of people working, often very horrendous, exploitative conditions, to make this AI possible.
I'm talking to you, James, from San Francisco, on the edge of Silicon Valley. For several years now, we've seen these Jaguar cars owned by Google driving around the city, I guess, doing exactly what you're saying, learning the city, so that now we have automated vehicles, cabs in particular. Why is that exploitation, though? The people driving those cars in San Francisco, I assume, again, perhaps you will correct me, but they seem to be properly being paid. What's exploitative about that?
It's not so much the people that are driving the cars, it's people that are annotating the data. And what that means is when that footage gets made from the cars that are driving around various cities, that footage is then sent, hundreds and hundreds of hours of it is sent to places like India, the Philippines, Uganda. And, there are enormous digital sweatshops where hundreds of workers are sitting in rows on computers with very strict deadlines, with long, arduous shifts, with very little pay, with very incredibly organized regimes of labor discipline. And they are forced to do this incredibly mind-numbing work day in, day out. And I think that's kind of what's objectionable, because what we're essentially seeing is kind of a new wave of the sweatshop debates, this work being shipped out, exported to the global south. And it's really done under very, very bad conditions.
I have to admit, I'm not convinced by this, although you obviously know a lot more about it. The first response would be, this isn't slavery. People are choosing to work for these companies. So why is that exploitative?
Yeah, the question isn't whether or not people have a choice. The question is, what is the power balance like in these relationships? What we're saying is that AI makes possible these enormous global networks where people are connected as part of these supply chains. But some people just have a lot more choice than others. There are people at the forefront of this technology. They can decide what technology gets developed, the conditions under which it happens. If you are a worker kind of in northern Uganda and, some of these jobs are made available to you, and you're right to say that like some of this work is potentially preferable to other kinds of work that might be available to them. But I think the problem here is that the conditions under which it is offered is incredibly exploitative. It's not a question of whether the job's available or not. What we're seeing is like a global race to the bottom in terms of working conditions, because companies like Facebook and Tesla and the lead tech firms are setting the conditions under which a lot of this work takes place. And what they're looking for is the cheapest cost, the fastest way their product can be produced. And I think the point of the book is really that these companies need to start setting better minimum conditions for their workers, and not allowing these forms of exploitation to take place in their supply chains.
You keep on talking about something called data annotation, James. You mentioned the less developed parts of the world, places like northern Uganda. Could you give me some concrete numbers in terms of, these are huge companies. OpenAI is a startup, but it's a multi-billion-dollar startup. The big tech Goliaths, the Googles, the Teslas of the world, or certainly Google, these are trillion-dollar companies. How large are these centers? When you talk about data annotation, how central is it to their new AI algorithms and products? How many people are actually employed in these data annotation centers?
Yeah, well, the couple of centers that we visited and we conducted interviews and did research at, we were talking kind of thousands of employees. The World Bank estimates that there's kind of like over 100 million people engaged in various forms of online gig work. The global
Say
data
that again. Over 100 million.
Over 100 million people engaged in various forms of online gig work. So the boundaries between different types of this type of work are a bit blurry. Some people call it microwork, some people call it cloud work. Various forms of work that you're basically doing online for, it could be tech companies or it could be other clients. But the numbers, global data annotation is a kind of $1 billion industry.
Which isn't very much. That sounds a lot to individuals like you and I, but $1 billion industry for the big tech players is minimal.
I think compared to the other types of investment they have to make, sure, there's a lot of things that cost a lot more. Buying compute costs a lot more, buying AI chips costs a lot more. But getting their data sets annotated is an absolutely essential part of training AI. And so it is an essential aspect of their business. It's not something that is just like somehow trivial or non-essential to the work. It's an enormous part of it, and something that we'll see continue, well into the future of the development of AI.
You say it's central, but you say what, thousands of workers? We're not talking hundreds of thousands.
Globally, it would be millions of workers. I said at the center that we visited, it was thousands of individuals in this particular center. So
tell us about this center, James, that you visited for the book. Where was it?
So we visited a series of centers in Kenya, in Nairobi, and in Kampala, in Uganda, and in northern Uganda in a town called Gulu. And there were 3 centers all engaged in kind of this data annotation work, where the work is kind of exported to them. And what we really saw there is like the conditions for the workers there were, left much to be desired, basically.
Who owns these centers?
So the centers usually, it varies. Sometimes they have their headquarters in places like San Francisco or Canada. Sometimes they are companies that are kind of locally based. We could talk about them as kind of.
Well, let's talk about the one in Kenya. Who owns it? What's it called?
Well, the one we did our research at in Kenya is owned by a company called SAMA, and they were kind of in the news for this data annotation work. And
SAMA, is that what it's called?
SAMA, yeah, that's correct. So it was started by someone of kind of Zuckerberg's generation called Leila Jana, since passed away, but it's kind of started off as this Tech for Good initiative, and things kind of developed from there, and it's a for-profit business now, and they take contracts from many of the leading tech firms.
So this company SAMA, it's not owned by any of the AI companies. It's not owned by OpenAI. what they're outsourcing some of their work. It doesn't
Exactly.
strike
So
me as being
some of
central.
the data annotation work gets outsourced, and it's not just some. There is kind of dozens of these outsourced centers where, you know, the big tech companies can kind of keep workers at arm's length. They don't want to invest in kind of employment contracts. They don't. There's a certain reputational hazard depending on what happens with the work. They are, very, very keen to kind of push this work as far away from possible as from their own brand. And that's kind of what the whole outsourcing initiative is about.
And is that your interpretation, or again in the new book, Feeding the Machine, do you show that the big tech companies are choosing to distance themselves from companies like Sama?
Well, I think the motivations are one, cost. You know, it's a lot cheaper for the tech companies to find labor markets where labor can be sourced at a much lower cost. But it is also, you know, very clearly a kind of reputational question, right? It's a lot of this work is done in conditions that the company is very keen to keep out of the media and to keep away from the spotlight, and that is a core part of the business model and why outsourcing is done and why it works the way it does.
So what are these people doing? Again, coming back to data annotation in Nairobi in Kenya, what exactly are they doing? Are they massaging data?
Well, it depends on the product, but it could be anything from kind of drawing what's called bounding boxes around images. So, you know, this is a person, this is a tree, this is a car. That might be an example for an automated.
That's very. Sorry to jump in here, James. Do algorithms, you know, incredibly sophisticated algorithms like OpenAI or Anthropic, do they really need these workers from Sama who are doing what you call data annotation to run their algorithms?
It seems that way. Otherwise, I'm not sure why they would send the contracts out there.
Well, how would that, just use the example of Anthropic? How is that AI product being improved by data annotation?
Yeah, well, in the case of computer vision, which are things like automated driving, or anytime a camera is kind of surveying a field and picking up, you know, determining what different objects are, most of that kind of video and pictures are annotated with kind of, you know, diagrams and points around a box. In the case of language models, it's going to be, you know, a question of refining the answers. And so one example might be, you know, the model is asked to perform on a certain inquiry, and it will give 3 responses, and the annotator will judge which one is best. That could be one example that would be happening for something
that
like
sounds, if they're for large language models, for LLMs, refining the answer sounds like, if it is indeed human work, which I'm slightly skeptical of, that work sounds quite sophisticated, all too human, isn't it? To look at 3 answers and say, well, which one is the best, which is the most convincing?
Yeah, it really depends a lot on what the type of AI training is. Some of it can be kind of weeding out toxic content, so trying to get the model to respond in less objectionable ways or less negative ways. Other times it can be a question of trying to just gradually figure out which responses are preferred by humans. But yeah, this is one among many different types of work that these humans are doing.
So in your argument, this is the unseen plumbing of the AI world. We don't see it, but there really are humans down there actually fixing this thing so that when we use our algorithms, what we see is not just accurate, but acceptable. Is that the argument?
Well, I mean, it's not necessarily my argument. This is how models are trained. It's called reinforcement learning with human feedback, and this is how all the big tech companies train their models. It's actually perhaps the most important characteristic that gave OpenAI its edge and made ChatGPT 3 so successful. They started doing this method of reinforcement learning. So yeah, it's just how it works, basically.
James, what about this? You quoted the World Bank of what you said, 100 million people working in this world. What are most of them doing? I mean, you talked about a few thousand at the some of the centers you went to, but what are the 100 million is a lot of people. What exactly are they doing?
Well, I mean, the problem with this is that it's really hard to get very accurate numbers on a lot of how many people are doing this work. Obviously, there aren't, the locations in which this work is taking place. People aren't exactly filling out censuses all the time and kind of recording accurately what's going on. The World Bank figure is kind of all online. So that could include a vast number of things that aren't necessarily this very specific type of data annotation. But people are doing all types of things, right? It's every tech product requires a lot of human labor to all the behind the scenes stuff that you just don't see as a consumer. But if you talk to software developers and people who work in tech companies, depending on the product, it's there, and it's not all glamorous work. It's not all highly paid AI, machine learning engineers. Some of it is very kind of menial. And relatively low skill other forms of data annotation. And in the book, we cover a wide range of people. Data annotation is one chapter of the 7. We also look at people who work at data centers, people who are the machine learning engineers, artists, labor organizers, all these people that are part of the AI supply chain in one way or another.
When you went to the SAMA Data Annotation Center in Nairobi in Kenya, did you talk to some of the workers?
Yeah, we conducted interviews with dozens of the workers. Our whole purpose there was to kind of learn from the workers themselves what their conditions were like, what they knew about the job, what their daily life was, how they kind of sustained themselves. So we really heard dozens of stories. And yeah, it was very shocking what we learned.
And were they unhappy? Did they feel exploited? And obviously, again, coming back to the point I made earlier, why exactly were they doing it? I mean, obviously to earn money.
Yeah, I mean, people, I would say that the main feeling that we got was just a sense of a lack of future and a sense of a lack of hope. These are people who, often have, entrepreneurial ideas themselves, right? They want to start their own business. They want to participate in this, movement of technology. And that's kind of what they're promised, right? They are given jobs at these companies. A lot of them are graduates, they have university degrees. They've done, bachelors of management, of business, of various types of things. And they wanted, they want to be part of this. And it's the conditions under which they're allowed to be part, which I think we find most objectionable, right? Because they want to have a career, they want to progress. These are dead-end jobs, right? You're doing the same thing day in, day out. You're really just being used up by the system and not given an opportunity to ever build up enough capital yourself, maybe to start your own business or participate in other ways. You're just kind of sucked dry for your labor, so that in various places in the West, we can have these tech products.
So is the problem, James, that companies like SAMA, you're saying that they're misleading the people who work for them? They're university graduates, so presumably they have other opportunities of work. Is this a problem with tech, with data annotation companies like SAMA, or is this more of a structural problem with global capitalism? Because the kind of unhappiness that you express, you'd find in startups in Silicon Valley too. A lot of people aren't happy with it. They jump from they go from job to job feeling dissatisfied one way or the other.
A lot more opportunities in Silicon Valley, right? Like you just said, they're choosing to start a business. They're choosing to go somewhere else. There's no choice in places like this. The choice is between this one job, which, to be honest, is like often better than the available alternatives, right? It's better than selling mobile phones in the market. It's better than selling fruit or veg on the side of the road. So people do want this kind of job.
But isn't that then a critique of the Kenyan economy rather than a big tech? That if kids are coming out of universities with degrees, that's got nothing to do with technology.
It's a critique of the kind of global system, call it capitalism, call it the global economy, that allows for this kind of uneven development. But it's also a more specific critique of these big tech companies, because it is within the power of a Facebook or a Tesla to say to their suppliers, we want minimum standards on these supply chains. And indeed, they do say that, right? But the standards are so low. And so they have the power. They can raise minimum wage up. They can pay a living wage in these countries. It would cost them very, very little to do so. but they're counting on the fact that this kind of stuff isn't really known by consumers and they can get away with it. And I think that's the real problem, that there's companies taking advantage of their kind of structural position within these markets to get away with treating these workers unethically.
We're speaking with James Muldoon, the co-author of Feeding the Machine, a very provocative new book, which he co-authored with Mark Graham and Callum Cant. They are a trio of researchers, polemicists who work for a group called Fair Work. We're going to take a short break. Well, I want to thank my friends at Liberties for bringing us great guests like James Muldoon. It's a new quarterly of culture and politics, addressing a lot of the issues that James is dealing with in his new book. Going to run a short feature on Liberties. And I want to come back with James. He's laid out the problem. What are we going to do about it? How are we going to fix feeding the machine? So we'll be back in a second. Don't go away, anyone.
The noise, there is nuance, insight. Liberties is not just a journal of ideas. It's a meteor of intelligent substance. It's the place to be for engaged citizens. Politics, opinion, substance. Liberties is a triumph for freedom of thought. A quarterly of urgency, of cultural exploration, of intellectual delight, of immaculate prose. It's invaluable. Subscribe now or find Liberties at your favorite bookseller.
And you can subscribe to Liberties at libertiesjournal.com. We are speaking with James Muldoon, one of the three authors of Feeding the Machine, the hidden human labor powering AI. James, as I said, what are we going to do to fix this? You're involved with Fair Work with your co-authors. It's an institute at Action Research Organization at Oxford. Do we want more or less labor? Because much of the existential worry about AI is it's doing away with labor. And then you seem to be suggesting in this new book that that there's too much labor behind AI. So what do you want here? What's the fix?
It's not a question of whether there's too much or too little. It's a question of the working conditions for all of these essential workers that are creating AI. And this includes some of those data annotators we talked about in various places in the global south. But it's also a whole range of people. You know, we want fair working conditions for the engineers and for the data centers and the janitorial staff within these tech companies. So it's really all workers, you know, deserve decent standard conditions, that they can have a minimum wage, they can have collective voice by joining a union, and, you know, they can have holiday pay, sick pay, all those things that many of us enjoy in other forms of work.
Don't even have that though in the US, James. You're in the UK, a different kind of economic system. In the US, a lot of the things you talked about don't exist.
I mean, well, yeah, we think that they should exist for all workers. I mean, that's what the workers' movement has been struggling for you know, hundreds of years.
So what's your broader thinking about the future of AI? There is, as you know as well as I do, a massive boom of AI. The last few weeks, the global stock markets have begun to question, where do you see all this going in terms of labor? Are we going to have more and more jobs being powered by AI, or fewer and fewer?
I think AI, at least large language models, are a bit overhyped at the moment. There have been huge promises of them completely revolutionizing different industries, of replacing, you know, large amounts of workers. I think what we're seeing right now is basically a bit of a reality check, that there are pretty hard limits to what large language models can do. It's basically, you know, they're very good at summarizing text, at kind of finding patterns in certain types of data that gets fed to them, but they're not very good at taking initiative, at understanding broader context, at understanding social situations. So there's going to be pretty hard limits to what they can do. And I think what we're really seeing now is a lot of investors realizing that the thing that they didn't understand and that had kind of been hyped up to them actually is, you know, has a pretty strict number of use cases. And yeah, the stocks will probably correct themselves, but I don't think that's to say that AI is completely a waste of time or that its hype is obviously very useful for certain types of tasks. It will lead to, you know, incredible breakthroughs in certain fields, and that's all well and good. But I think we just need to understand that while we're enjoying the benefits of AI, we need to think critically about the kinds of people that are creating it and making sure that they share those benefits as well.
What about all of us? You wrote an interesting piece for the London Independent earlier this year. What ChatGPT has done to Scarlett Johansson, i.e. essentially stealing her voice, should scare us all. How should all of us, in terms of our data integrity, be concerned with the AI revolution, particularly LLMs?
Well, the main issue here is that to keep training LLMs and making them smarter and more capable, more and more data is going to need to be used. So as an academic, someone who writes and publishes articles and books, recently I just learned that one of the companies that I publish with has, on their own initiative, signed a deal with one of these models, and that some of my articles will be used to train them. And of course, the problem here with these kinds of, language and image generating tools is that they're basically taking from the commons all of these, millions of books and articles that have been written, completely unacknowledged, often uncompensated. And they're taking those and creating a tool that is then used just to make profit for the company. And I think there are certain issues here. Numerous companies are starting copyright claims against them. Many writers, all this has kind of been in the news a lot about these copyright claims.
Which company are you specifically talking about? Which of your which publisher did which deal with which AI company?
I'd have to look up the details. I just saw it briefly on Twitter. I'm not sure which one in particular, but I'm sure if you just Google academic publisher, you would find it out.
But even in that sense, James, they pay you for your work. They have every right. I mean, lots of some German companies, even the FT and the Atlantic, which have been very critical of OpenAI, have done deals with them. Isn't this a good way of trying to monetize human creativity? So that authors, thinkers like yourself end up being paid because these publishers have done deals with companies like OpenAI?
Yeah, so the company I was talking about was Taylor and Francis, and I think the main problem here is obviously what they were doing before that, which was just taking the work in a completely unacknowledged and uncompensated way. The problem for me, at least, with the deal with Taylor and Francis is that I didn't have any agreement over that. I didn't agree to have my work used to train LLMs. So I think in that case, and the same for, all of these newspapers, like all the people who work for them haven't agreed to that. Sure, I've been compensated, if you could call it that, for having my work there. Most academics are not paid to produce articles, but that's kind of a completely different debate about the exploitative nature of academic publishing. But, a lot of this labor is very unacknowledged and it's uncompensated. And that's precisely the problem. And the article that I wrote about Scarlett Johansson is based on a couple of stories that we heard from voice actors who had their voices basically, without them knowing, synthesized and turned into a kind of AI clone. And these voice actors who are professionals, they get jobs doing scripts, doing computer games, or you name it, and they're now competing with a synthetic version of themselves, right? And so this is what we're worried about, the kind of situation in which, authors and writers and various artists' work is being used to train replacements for themselves, and they're not being compensated. And it's basically just another way in which these companies are trying to exploit artists and workers and get more of a buck out of their work without paying them properly.
Supporters of this technology and people working for these firms would argue that you sound somewhat of a reactionary, a little bit of a Luddite, that hand workers, for example, were undermined by the Industrial Revolution, but new jobs were created. And the voice artists that you talk about being replaced by the artificial voice of people like Scarlett Johansson will find other forms of labor. Is there any legitimacy in that argument, that always we seem to be having the same argument, particularly from the beginning of the 19th century, about the impact of industrial labor on the old hand-working economy, that every time we have new technology, old jobs are destroyed, yes, but at the same time, new jobs are created?
It's not necessarily a question of whether the jobs are being destroyed or not, or whether technology is going to replace on. We're talking about what AI is being used to do, right? And it could be used to make workers' life easier and better. It could be used to get, to automate the dreary and the drudgery of their work. But what we're seeing is the exact opposite, that AI is now writing poems and writing music and doing all the creative stuff. And it's forcing humans to do all the dreary and drudgery. And this is the question here. It's like, how are companies using AI? And what they're using them for is essentially to try to get more work out of workers, to make them work harder, and to find ways to kind of algorithmically manage their work processes, so that you now have AI determining the pace of the work, the rhythm of the work, how warehouse workers should behave, what kinds of movements they should make, what pace they should make them at. We're talking about the way in which technology is used and who gets to benefit from the kind of profits from it.
Well, finally, James, why don't you dream a little bit? In 25 years, which is several centuries in Silicon Valley terms, what could AI look like if you close your eyes? What would you like if James Muldoon ran the world and ran Silicon Valley? What is the best future of AI in 25 years by the middle of the 21st century? What would the world look like?
Yeah, well, it would be one in which the people who made AI did so under conditions of, decent pay, the right to collective bargaining, sick pay, holiday pay, all that, all throughout the supply chain, right? That this wasn't something that workers would get in Europe, a little bit in the US and then not at all elsewhere in the world. That workers would be treated decently, that they would get decent conditions, and that AI would be put to use to satisfy human needs, right? To allow people to do more interesting work, to augment their abilities, to allow them to, explore their creative pursuits, to be able to do their, other work more efficiently, more effectively. And I think we would want to see a world in which, the workers and the people who are using AI had a lot more say over how it was developed. Because what we're seeing at the moment is just a handful of tech executives in Silicon Valley telling everyone else what's useful, what they should want, what products they should buy. And what we genuinely need to see is a world in which, the people who use AI have a genuine say over how it's determined.
Sounds to me, James, like Denmark. Maybe we'll all get to Denmark sometime by the middle of the 21st century. Congratulations on the new book, Feeding the Machine, which you co-authored with Mark Graham and Callum Cant. Very interesting argument. The hidden human labor powering AI. You've traveled around the world looking at that hidden human labor. You've uncovered it. Congratulations. And I will have to get you back on the show, certainly before the middle of the 21st century, to figure out what else we need to do with AI. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you for having me on.